Hey everybody, it's time for another devotional today. And I know we got a break yesterday as Steve was able to give us the blog that he was able to write yesterday. And if you haven't had a chance to read that, I would highly encourage you to do so. But we're back on today looking at a concept that's been kind of going around and around in my mind. And what I'm going to be doing today is talking about the concept of wisdom. Now, we looked through the book of James, and we understand that we talked about wisdom in trials. I want to go back to the Old Testament, and I want to look at what wisdom is and isn't, and how we can live wise lives. But then even more importantly, I'm hoping that by the time we're done today, that you don't just understand what wisdom is for you and for me and how we can act wise and live wisely in the world that we find ourselves in, but even more so, how we can trust in the wisdom of God. That even when our wisdom fails, that we know that God is all wise. And so I hope that today we have an opportunity to do that. And what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be using videos. Actually, this devotional is going to be pretty heavy with videos that I've gotten again from the Bible Project. It's one of my favorite websites right now, and just teaching about the Bible and how it connects together. And I'm going to be using 3 different videos. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the concept of wisdom in the Old Testament from the wisdom books. And those wisdom books are Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Book of Job. Now, sometimes we don't even think about maybe Job as a wisdom book, but it really is. And as these videos are going to show, and as we're going to talk about today, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job all really weave together to give us this picture of what wisdom is, what wisdom isn't, and most importantly, how God is all wise. And we're going to look at the 3 together, how they connect, and I hope that we can just glean some wisdom, glean some knowledge as we look at this concept in looking at each of these books and how they connect together. And then I just want to, in between each video, I'm just going to say a few things. You're going to see mostly video. You'll see me, just a couple thoughts that I had as I watched these videos that I want to share with you. And hopefully by the end of today, we will walk away knowing what it looks like to pursue wisdom. And even when we don't understand the way this world works, how we can trust God's wisdom above all. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with this video on the Book of Proverbs.
There are 3 books in the Bible that have come to be called the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job.
And all of these books are addressing the same set of questions. What kind of world are we living in? And what does it look like to live well in this world?
So, how to be good at life.
Yeah. So each of these books tackles these questions from a unique perspective, and it's important to understand all of them to get a fully biblical perspective on the good life. So as a thought experiment, you could actually imagine each of these books as a person. So Proverbs would be like this brilliant young teacher, and Ecclesiastes the sharp middle-aged critic, and Job would be this weathered old man who's seen a lot in his day.
We're going to start by meeting the Book of Proverbs, the brilliant young teacher. And she's not just smart, she's smart about everything: work, relationships, sex, spirituality. She has incredible insights, things you wouldn't see on your own.
Yeah, she would be the perfect friend to have around when you need really specific advice.
So what makes her so smart?
Well, Proverbs can see things that most people don't see. She believes that there's an invisible creative force in the universe that can guide people in how they should live. And you can't see it, just like you can't see gravity, but it affects everything that we do.
So what's this force?
Well, in Hebrew, it's called chokhmah, and it usually gets translated into English as wisdom. It's an attribute of God that God used to create the world. And chokhmah has been woven into the fabric of things and how they work. So wherever people are making good or just or wise decisions, they're tapping into chokhmah.
And whenever someone's making a bad decision, they're working against chokhmah.
Right, or as it says in Proverbs chapter 1, the waywardness of fools will destroy them, but the one who listens to wisdom lives in security.
So it's like a moral law of the universe.
Yeah, it's a cause-effect pattern, and no one can escape it. And Proverbs personifies all of this as a woman.
Yeah, Lady Wisdom.
Right, and she roams around the earth, calling out, making herself available to anyone who's willing to listen to her and to learn. Which leads to the second thing Proverbs believes, that anyone can access and interact with wisdom and use it to make a beautiful life for yourself or for others.
You can create with it like a designer.
Yes, in fact, chokhmah in Hebrew isn't simply intellectual knowledge. The word is also used to describe a skilled artisan who excels at their craft, like woodworking or stonemasonry. So you show you possess chokhmah when you put it to work and develop the skill of making a good life.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's do this. Let's go find some wisdom.
But before you do, Proverbs has one more really important thing to consider. Chokhmah isn't some impersonal force. It's an attribute of God himself. And so in Hebrew thought, your journey to becoming wise has to begin with what Proverbs calls the fear of the Lord. It's this healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil. And true wisdom means learning those boundary lines and not crossing them.
Now, all those ideas you just unpacked are in chapters 1 through 9 in Proverbs. But when I think of the book of Proverbs, I think of the collection of sayings, the Proverbs themselves. Tell me about those.
Yeah, those are what you find in chapters 10 on to the end of the book. It's a collection of hundreds and hundreds of proverbs about any and all aspects of life. And chokhmah gets applied to them, resulting in this wise guidance to help you find a path towards success, and no matter what you do.
If I design my life with these sayings, life is going to be good.
Yeah, or as Proverbs puts it, it'll give health to your bones, prosperity, a long, rich life.
Which is a really big claim.
But you can see how it's often the case. Wise people, they tend to do better. Things usually work out well for them in life. And so that is the promise and the wisdom of the book of Proverbs.
The book of Proverbs is really beautiful, but if we take a step back, some people would argue it's a little too simplistic, because sometimes horrible things happen to really wise people, and sometimes foolish people get rewarded. It doesn't always work the way we think it should work.
That's right, which is why we need to go and listen to our next wise friend, Ecclesiastes the critic, because he's wrestled with that very problem, and he's going to push us further in our journey to find the good life.
So there it is as we look at the book of Proverbs. And really, when we look at the book of Proverbs, I think we start right off with a good definition of what wisdom really is. And wisdom is how to live well in this world. How do you live well and live right and live in a way that is honoring to God? That is the whole point of Proverbs. And there's lots of different small pieces as we look at the book of Proverbs, and we look at how we can take those little one or two liners and apply those to our lives. But even bigger and greater than that, we see that wisdom is an attribute of God. That wisdom is actually a part of who God is. And so to seek wisdom is to seek God. Like, it's not this force that's kind of out there that we just figure out because we try to figure out how we can live best, and we figure it out on our own, and whatever works and whatever doesn't. That's not the point of wisdom. The wisdom is to be seeking God. It's his attribute of wisdom that he has, and so therefore when we follow wisdom, when we follow wise advice, we really are following who God is. We're looking to him for our wisdom. And don't we need that right now? We've talked about that in the book of James during our sermons. But I think all of us are really at a point right now, we just feel like we need wisdom. How do we live day to day? How do we live well day to day? And whether our lives have been turned upside down or whether they're pretty consistent, either way, how do we live well and how do we really have wisdom? It's also a good reminder in the book of Proverbs that wisdom is not just about knowledge. That video talked about it's not just this knowledge that we have, but it's actually like a skillful living. It's an application of knowledge that is given by God. It's an application of God's knowledge, and we look to him for our wisdom, and we apply what we know, and we apply what we learn, and we live in a way that is honoring to him. And the way that Proverbs seems to indicate is if you do that, if you follow God's wisdom, if you follow his advice, then life will go well for you. And if you don't, if you're foolish, then things probably won't turn out really well for you. Now, as they said in the video, we're going to see in Ecclesiastes and Job that that's not always the case. That these proverbs that are given to us are very good pieces of advice that should, in a very good ordered world, end in a way where the faithful are rewarded and the foolish are not. However, that's not always how it works. And so it's hard for us to kind of understand that. And that's why we do need to look at Ecclesiastes. And that's why we do need to look at Job. Because it completes the picture of what wisdom is. It completes the picture of God's wisdom. Because remember, wisdom is all about him. Again, the overarching theme of the book of Proverbs, and we'll even see it in the other two books, is that wisdom really is the fear of the Lord. The fear of God, the fear of Yahweh. The fear that we have, not a I'm afraid of you, God, but a reverential awe and respect, so much to the point where we will live our lives in as a reflection of who God is. And that's the whole point of fearing God. And so we understand that wisdom should equal the good life. Now, just common sense tells us this. Like, someone who does a foolish thing. I mean, just think about something in your life that maybe you've done that is foolish. I remember a real quick story. We were at Circle C, and I was helping with hay, and we were driving up into the hay field on a pickup truck. And everybody else got in the back of the pickup truck, fairly wise. They sat down, they were ready to go up, and I thought it'd be really fun for me to stand on the back of the truck, to grab onto the tailgate and stand right there and kind of ride it like I was surfing almost. Really foolish thing to do. So we go up this hill, we hit a big bump. Now the wise people who sat in the truck didn't get hurt, but the foolish person who was standing on the back fell off, smacked my face on the ground, and got a bloody nose and blacked out. And luckily I was not injured terribly, but it did not work out well for me. So the very truth of the matter is, just common sense tells us that most of the time, if you live wise, things go better. If you live foolishly, things will get not so good for you. And so I think that's something we can understand as we look at Proverbs. But again, as we go to Ecclesiastes, we see that that's not always the case. And how do we wrestle with that? How do we wrestle with the fact that sometimes foolish people don't get what they deserve, and sometimes people who are wise actually end up living a life where they feel like they're being punished? And we're going to look at those couple things as we look at these next couple books. So with that, why don't you join me as we look at our next book, Ecclesiastes, and how it relates to wisdom. Take a look.
We're exploring 3 books in the Bible known as the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And they're all asking the question, what does it mean to live well in this world?
So we've looked at Proverbs, who you could think of as a bright young teacher.
She's all about pursuing wisdom, an attribute of God that's woven into reality. And she's optimistic that if you use wisdom, you will build a successful life.
But then we come to Ecclesiastes, who's more like this sharp, middle-aged critic. And he says,
"You think using wisdom will bring you success. You'd better think again, because life here under the sun is meaningless."
And that's a phrase he uses a lot in this book.
But to understand this book, we have to realize first that we're hearing 2 voices.
So first there's the teacher, and we've been calling him the critic. He's the main voice in the book.
But he is introduced to us by another figure, the author. And he's the one who's collected the critic's words, and then at the end of the book summarizes everything and gets the final word.
So why does the author want us to hear from the critic?
Well, he wants to turn your view of the world upside down, and he's going to let the critic explore 3 really disturbing things about the world.
And we should warn you, these are pretty intense.
Yeah, so the first is the march of time, or as the critic says,
Generations come and generations go, but the earth, it's been here long before us and will be long after. No one remembers people from long ago, and all the people yet to come, they too will be forgotten by those who come after them.
So, on a cosmic scale, you and I, we are just a blip. Stars are born, and then they die and form planets which orbit new stars, and those planets, they change over time and eventually burn up.
And amidst this cosmic backdrop, my entire existence is like a blink in time.
Which leads to the critic's second disturbing observation, that we are all going to die.
Humans face the same fate as the animals: death. All people, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, those who offer sacrifices to God and those who do not, they all share the same destiny. All this activity and madness, then we all join the dead.
Man, this book is depressing.
And so is the final disturbing thing for the critic, and that is life's random nature.
So in Proverbs, life isn't random. There's a clear cause and effect relationship between doing the right thing and being rewarded.
But the fact is that life doesn't always work that way. The critic has observed a glitch in the system. He calls it chance, or in his words,
The race doesn't always go to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food always come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the educated. Time and chance happen to them all.
So his point is that you can't really control anything in life. It's just way too unpredictable.
So if I want to master life,
Then you're setting yourself up for a fall. Now, throughout the book, the critic uses a metaphor to tie together all of these disturbing ideas. Nearly 40 times he says that everything in life is hevel. It's a Hebrew word that means smoke or vapor. Like smoke, life is beautiful and mysterious.
it takes one shape, and before you know it, it takes a new shape.
And smoke looks solid, but try and grab it, it'll slip right through your fingers.
And when you're stuck in the thick of it, like fog, it's impossible to see clearly.
Now, our modern translations have lost the metaphor, and they usually translate hevel as meaningless. But if you read closely, the critic isn't saying that life has no meaning, but rather that its meaning is never clear. Like smoke, life is confusing, it's disorienting and uncontrollable.
So, what are we supposed to do with all of it?
Well, surprisingly, the critic first of all acknowledges the perspective of Proverbs. He says it's a really good idea to learn wisdom and to live in the fear of the Lord.
Really? I mean, he just said that doesn't guarantee success.
But he knows it's the right thing to do. But secondly, and more often, he says that since you can't control your life, you should stop trying. Learn to hold things with an open hand because you really only have control over one thing, and that's your attitude towards the present moment. Stop worrying, he says, and choose to enjoy a good conversation with a friend, or the sun on your face, or a good meal with people that you care about.
The simple things in life.
Yes, and both the good things and the bad, because both are rich gifts from God. And that's the surprising wisdom of Ecclesiastes.
Listening to the critic is painful and can lead you into some dark places.
And that's why the author speaks up at the end of the book. He doesn't want you to lose hope. He wants to make you humble into someone who trusts that life has meaning even when you can't make sense of it, that one day God will clear the hevel and bring his justice on all that we've done. And so he tells us that the proper response to all of this is to fear the Lord and keep his commandments.
And that's the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, there's one more voice in the Bible's wisdom literature, and that's the book of Job.
And he will bring us the final, much-needed perspective on our journey into wisdom.
Ecclesiastes is a book that I think is fairly well misunderstood many times. A lot of times we look at Ecclesiastes and we can look at it as this very depressing, discouraging book. Like, why even worry about life? Life is so meaningless and it doesn't have any hope. But that's not the point of this book. The point of this book is to, again, explore wisdom and explore what it means for us to understand wisdom in this world. And a couple of things that I just want to draw out as we looked at this book of Ecclesiastes. And some of you have been with us when we've studied this, even in our church. And you remember this idea of smoke, the idea of just something that is fading and kind of blurry. I think they do a great job talking about smoke. So many times we talk about it being meaningless, but it's not that life has no meaning. If it had no meaning, then why even bother living? But the point is here that we just don't really know what the meaning of life is all the time. We can't always figure it out because we're not all wise. We don't have all knowledge and all understanding. And so Ecclesiastes says sometimes this world doesn't act the way we want it to. Sometimes this world spins out of control, and our control is just like grasping smoke, and it's just going to disappear. And we don't have any real control over this life. Things will just fade away. Life is unpredictable. And whereas Proverbs says, be wise and good things happen, or be foolish and bad things happen, that is a general statement that is usually true, but not always. And so we can't stake our claim on the fact that we know for sure that if we do something right, that good will happen to us. Sometimes life happens in a way that we find ourselves in very confusing situations. Right now might be one for you. Who knew that a year ago, just think about a year ago and thinking about all the plans we had, all the thoughts we had, but now our lives have really just completely changed. And we have no control over life. We can't grasp it. And it's hard to understand the meaning of it all. Why is a virus happening like this? Why is our world being shut down? And we have this leftover feeling that sometimes life just isn't fair. And the truth of the matter is, if we want to use the word fair, it's not. Life isn't fair in our mindset. And sometimes things don't go the way that we want them to. And so life's meaning is not clear. It's like smoke. It's foggy. It's hard to see. It's hard to grasp. We don't really get it. So what do we glean from that? Instead of getting depressed or discouraged by that, we should actually be encouraged in the sense of we should be trusting God because He's got it in His hands. I may not understand what's going on. I'm not in control. I don't see the purpose, but God does. That's the beauty of it. That's why at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, we're told to fear God and keep His commands, because since God is the one who does see through the smoke, since God is the one who knows the meaning of life, then who else is better to trust with our lives than God Himself? Yet so many times we trust ourselves and we try to control things ourselves, and it just leaves us empty, and it leaves us feeling completely worthless and hopeless, which is kind of what this book of Ecclesiastes is talking about. If we try to live our lives without God, then there is no real meaning. The only real meaning comes from God because He's the only one that can see it. He's the only one that knows it. He's the only one that orchestrates it. And so we trust in God's sovereignty, we trust in His knowledge, we trust in His wisdom. That's what we can do. Really, the only thing that we can control in this life is whether or not we follow God and fear Him, whether or not we truly respect Him and follow His commands. And we can do that. That's all we can control. And in the meantime, this is the beautiful part of Ecclesiastes. They talked about the idea of holding things with an open hand. Not to clutch and grab and think that somehow you can hold on to life and control it, but instead, when God gives you gifts, to just embrace them and have an open hand to receive them and understand that they could go away as soon as they come. And as we understand that, then that can free us from a way of living in which we feel like we have to be in control, where we feel like we have to know everything that's going on all the time. It's okay sometimes to not know what's going on. And it's okay sometimes to not have control over your life. And actually, it's not only okay, but it's better. It's better to let God have control and to enjoy the things He gives us, the good and the bad, to embrace those and to take them in and know that God is at work. And that's why, again, we end in Ecclesiastes. The ending isn't just give up on life. The ending is follow God. And so if we want to have wisdom, just like Proverbs told us, we can't find wisdom apart from God. Ecclesiastes says the same thing. Even when life doesn't make sense, we can still run to God. Even when we don't understand the meaning of life, we can run to Him because He is in control, and we can trust and fear Him no matter what this world says to us, no matter how we feel. No matter how meaningless life may seem, God has a meaning, and God is in control, and so we trust Him. Now we move on to the last book, and what we just talked about. If you haven't seen the parallels already, if you know the book of Job, you see where we're going. The book of Job is about a man who experiences what Ecclesiastes talks about, the apparent meaningless of life, like why is God doing what He's doing, and why it just doesn't make sense. Why is the world a place that doesn't always make sense? That's what Ecclesiastes is asking, and we see the answer to that even greater in the book of Job, as we see Job go through an experience that will lead us to the end of this time together, that we see that our wisdom and how we look to wisdom, it all comes back to understanding God's wisdom and understanding God's sovereignty. And if we understand those things, then we can live this life with an open hand. We don't have to live in a life of worry or trying to control everything and grasping at life, but instead we can have hope. And Job shows us that as we look at this next video on what happens through the book of Job. Join me now.
There are 3 books in the Bible known as the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. The first, Proverbs, showed us that God is wise and just.
Yeah, we learned that God has ordered the world so that it's fair. The righteous are rewarded, the wicked are punished. In other words, you get what you deserve.
But then we meet Ecclesiastes, who observes, people don't always get what they deserve.
Yeah, he said the world isn't always fair, that life is unpredictable and hard to comprehend, just like smoke.
And this makes you wonder, okay, well, is God wise and just?
Exactly. And so it's that question that is being explored in the final book of wisdom, Job.
All right, let's dive in.
So Job begins with a strange story that takes place up in the heavens, which are described something like a heavenly command center. So God is there with these angelic creatures called the sons of God, and they're all there reporting for duty.
And God points out this guy Job, his servant, showing how righteous and good he is.
And then one of these angelic creatures approaches. He's referred to in Hebrew as the Satan.
The Satan. Who is this?
Well, this word is actually a title, which literally means the one who is opposed. So out of this whole crew, he is the one questioning how God is running the world. And he proposes that Job might not actually love God, that he's only a good person because God rewards him. If God were to take away all of the good things he gave to Job, then we would see his true colors.
So he thinks Job is just working the system?
That's exactly right. Maybe he's obeying just to get what he wants.
So God agrees to this experiment and allows the Satan to inflict suffering on Job.
And Job loses everyone and everything that he cares about. It is devastating. And remember, he deserves none of this. God himself said so.
The remarkable thing is that in the midst of all this suffering, Job still praises God.
At least for chapters 1 and 2. But then in chapter 3, we find out how he's really feeling inside. He unleashes this poem that reveals this devastation. It's a long, elaborate curse on the day that he was born.
After this, some of Job's friends come to visit him to offer their help. And all of them are like, Job, you must have done something horribly wrong to deserve this. After all, we know God is just, and we know the world is ordered by God's justice and fairness, so you must be getting what you deserve.
And for the next 34 chapters, the friends and Job go back and forth in very dense Hebrew poetry. His friends keep speculating about why God might have sent such suffering, and they even start making up lists of hypothetical sins that Job must have committed. But after each accusation, Job defends his innocence.
And Job is innocent.
He is. He's also on an emotional roller coaster. At some moments, he's very confident that God is still wise and just.
Yeah, in other moments, he's doubting God's goodness.
He even comes to accuse God of being reckless, unfair, and corrupt. So by the end of the dialogues, Job demands that God come and explain himself in person, and God does so. He comes in the form of a great storm cloud.
Now, God doesn't give Job a direct answer. He doesn't tell Job about the conversation with the Satan.
Yeah, he does something very different. He takes Job on a virtual tour of the universe. He shows Job how grand the world is, and he asks him if he's even capable of running it or understanding it, just for a day. He shows Job how much detail there is in the world, things that we might see every day, but really don't understand at all. But God does. He knows it all intimately. He pays attention to the beauty and operations of the universe in ways that we haven't even imagined and in places that we will never see.
Then to conclude, God shows Job two wondrous beasts and brags about how great they are.
Yeah, they are dangerous. I mean, they would kill you without even thinking about it. And God says they're not evil. They're actually a part of his good world.
And then that's it. That's God's whole defense. It's kind of weird. I mean, what was this all about?
It seems to be this. From Job's point of view, it looks like God is not just. But God's perspective is infinitely bigger. He's dynamically interacting with a whole universe of complexity when he makes decisions. And this is what God calls his wisdom.
So Job asking God to defend himself is actually kind of absurd.
He couldn't comprehend this kind of complexity even if he wanted to.
So where does this leave us?
Well, it leaves Job in a place of humility. He never learned why he suffered, and yet he's able to live in peace and in the fear of the Lord.
But that's not where the book ends, because after this, God restores to Job double everything he had lost. And this, again, is surprising. I mean, is this a reward? Is God saying, congratulations, Job, you passed this elaborate test?
No, I mean, the whole book just made the point that Job losing everything was not a punishment, and so now getting it back isn't a reward.
So why does he get it back?
Well, apparently, God, in his wisdom, decided to give Job a gift. We don't know why. But what we do know is that Job is now the kind of person who, no matter what comes, good or bad, he can trust God's wisdom.
And that's the Book of Job, and the end of our wisdom series.
These biblical books of wisdom are amazing. Each one offers a unique perspective on the good life, and you need to hear all of them together as you learn to live with wisdom and in the fear of the Lord.
one of the main themes that really comes out in Job, as I said about Ecclesiastes, is kind of Job is the story that goes along with the truth of Ecclesiastes. And this is a story in which we see a man who is seemingly punished, and his life does not go the way that he wants it to go, even though he's a godly, righteous man. And so how do we make sense of all of this? You see, the reward system that even Proverbs kind of pointed to a little bit is really challenged in the book of Job. Job is doing what is right, and yet he doesn't get a good reward for it. In fact, he is, what seems from our perspective, punished. That he is given bad things. And again, we look at this story, and we've looked at this before, and I've reminded you of this before, that in the book of Job, we often just want to blame Satan. But the truth of the matter is, God put Job in this position. He's the one that pointed Job out even to Satan during this time, this accuser that came to try to prove that God wasn't as good as he says he was, and because Job wouldn't really follow God if all his stuff was taken away. And so you've heard of the word karma. There's a lot of people that believe in karma. If you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. That's not always true. And Job's friends were people who believed in karma. His friends come and tell him that obviously he's sinning, and they make up sins, as we're looked at in that video, just to try to figure out for themselves. They're trying to figure out, okay, well, I'm really confused about my life right now, because if Job really is innocent, then what does that mean for me? And that's really, I think, what gets to the heart of why they're asking those questions. But don't we ask those questions even when we see other people around us, maybe that we know are godly people that are suffering, or when we see people who are ungodly who seem to be having great success? And we ask, how does this make sense? There's got to be a reasoning. And Job's friends, and even Job towards the end, as he's asking God, like, what have you done this for? He asks for an explanation. He says, God, you're being unfair. I mean, that's what Job gets to, and his friends are feeling the same way. And there's this angst of, how does wisdom really work? Why follow wisdom if it's not going to get you anywhere? And Job, masterfully, this book tells us exactly what is on God's mind as we think about wisdom. And you can read the story, you know the story. He lost everything in so many different ways. And his friends do come, and they have this conversation throughout the book. It's a beautifully written book, and it all points to wisdom. It's not just a random story, but it's a wisdom on how we face life, how we face this world that isn't always fair in our perspective. And the point I want to really focus on is the end of the book. The end of the book really does come around to Job had experienced all of this. He had a lot of real questions, real anxious, angry questions about why is God doing this to him? And God answers him. But see, God doesn't give him a specific answer like, well, okay, Job, let me explain to you exactly how this happened and why exactly I'm doing this to you. What God does instead is he paints this beautiful picture of his own wisdom and basically challenges Job's wisdom. Basically, God says to all of us, you may think you know what wisdom is, but if you don't know wisdom, I am wisdom. God is the all-wise one. He is the all-wise God that we can trust with our lives, and he is sovereign over everything. He's sovereign over viruses. He's sovereign over tragedy. He's sovereign over good times. He is sovereign over all. And he points out creation, and he says to Job, all of this that I made, do you have any idea how to make it or how to keep it going? And of course Job doesn't. And the same question could be asked for us as those times when we are questioning God and trying to figure out, God, why is life not fair for us? When we ask that question, we need to consider, who are we to question God in a sense? Who are we to really know anything? God created everything. He created not only the things we see in physical ways, but he created the laws of physics. He created everything we don't see and that we can see. And we can never understand that. He talks about Leviathan and Behemoth and talks about how those animals are so incredibly created and there is no way that we can understand it. And just take a moment to walk outside, look around you, and just think about what God has done. Even yesterday, I was out on a walk, and I just was caught by the bright greens of a tree that was coming into bloom. And right behind it was the just vibrant blue of the sky. And just how beautiful, just looking at those bright colors. And God created that. And why did he choose those colors? Well, Because he's all wise. I don't know. He could have made an orange sky and brown trees. I don't know. But the point is, what we see is that he has beautifully created everything and knows exactly what he's doing. He created the processes of photosynthesis. Sorry about that. He has created everything around us, and so we can trust him. Here's what we need to understand at the end of the book of Job and at the end of all these wisdom books. God's perspective is so much greater and so much different than ours. We may think we know what wisdom is. We may think we know what is fair, but we have no idea. The only one who truly knows wisdom and what truly is fair and just is God. And so where does that leave us? Well, if God is the one that fully understands wisdom, and God is the one that fully understands this world and understands exactly what he's doing, then who else better than to trust in than God himself? And yet so many times we run other places to find our hope or our trust, or to really look to other things. Or that we just get to the place where we are just giving up on even having hope because we feel like this world doesn't make sense. We feel like in Ecclesiastes life is meaningless, and we're trying to do what Proverbs says, but it's not doing any good for us. And Job tells us, yes, sometimes life from our perspective isn't fair. But God always is just, God always is good, and God always knows what is happening. So let us put our trust and our faith in him. Let us put our lives in his hands. Live with our hands open and put ourselves in his hands during this time. With that, I want to close reading the words of Job after God spoke to him, and then we'll quickly close in prayer. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now and I will speak. When I question you, you will inform me. I had heard rumors about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I take back my words and repent in dust and ashes. Let us concentrate on the first words of Job's response. I know that you can do anything, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. Let us trust in the sovereignty and wisdom of God today. Let us pray. Lord, thank you for this reminder from the books of wisdom in your Bible and your word. I pray that we would walk in wisdom, that we would live well, and that we would follow your commands, that we would fear you even in the times where it doesn't seem to make sense. I pray that we would trust you and put everything in your hands, even in the times that we don't get it. Even when we feel things are unfair, God, help us to trust you, help us to trust your sovereignty, and help us to trust your wisdom. And I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great day.